Grand, lovely. Right, welcome everybody to our masterclass with myself and Myles. Today we're going to talk about, the process of remobilization, rebuilding after a crisis, based on organization science. I'm going to do a short couple of introductory slides, then I'm going to hand over to Myles. So we decided today we would do a two-hander session, and please feel free to ask questions at any stage. Now, I just want to take, before we go much further, I just want to make sure that there's nobody else waiting to join us. The numbers are a little light, and I think that's because there are a number of competing webinars this afternoon. Really, we're looking at the process of organization response to a crisis, of which COVID-19 is a particularly unique crisis. And we have kind of 4 stages of the process. We have the whole rescue phase, which is about the immediate response driven by the survival instinct in an organization. Then we have the reshaping once the organization has stabilized, and then the rescaling of an organization. So just short introductions. The Organization Development Tools Institute focuses on the research and development of tools and knowledge related to transformation and change, and it's based on dynamic systems maturity theory. There are 2 founders, myself with a background in the ICT sector, both in the multinational corporations and also in entrepreneurial startups. And today I do work advising nationally and internationally on business change, transformation, and performance improvement. Myles has a background in the whole area of organization development, organization psychology. Having spent many years consulting, he's also worked in academia and is the principal investigator who spent many years researching and developing dynamic systems maturity theory. We have 2 innovation partners. We have Enterprise Ireland, the National State Enterprise Agency, and one of our leading universities here, Dublin City University. So our agenda today, we're going to set the scene for what's happening out there in organizations today. Look at the context at an organization level. Myles is going to talk about 4 typical strategies organizations can take to respond to a crisis. And then we look at the relevance and the advice and change management models. We look at a model to rebuild for the new world, and we'll introduce the theory of agile change management or dynamic systems maturity theory. And finally, we'll look at how using reference models and maturity assessment tools can help you navigate your way through the crisis for an organization and hopefully come out stronger in the end. So really just setting the general scene, COVID-19 is a significant change and impact in our whole socio-economic systems globally, and it's been compared to various wars, the financial crash, the depressions, the influenza outbreak back in 1918. And we may or may not have a vaccine in mid to late 2021 or treatment solutions. And there is some reopening now in many geographies due to economic necessity and need. And that's not necessarily a return to the old situation. You know, we're beginning to see that society and economies have to adapt to a scenario that is relatively unpredictable for the next period, as regards when we will be able to eliminate the consequences, if ever, of the COVID-19 vaccine. We do have a 6 to 18 month geopolitical risk period, you know, and that's impacting supply chains, globalization, and the way labor is organized to deliver products and services. And one of the things that the research has found is that, you know, there is a need to develop agility to cope for an organization in these particular scenarios. So what's the context of today's organizations? I guess, you know, certain organizations have been discovered to have weaknesses, and those weaknesses have surfaced out due to their inability to really respond effectively to the changes caused by this crisis, and prepare for the future. So, I mean, we already know that certain organizations will not recover, and some of them are already gone. The initial responses of many organizations, based on our research, shows that, you know, there wasn't time for the traditional time you would allocate to change management. Organizations had to respond very rapidly, and those that lacked agility struggled to work out what are they going to do. Those that had some level of agility or were willing to take quick action without much change management process have basically focused on securing the immediate requirements, but the underlying capabilities to sustain those changes may not be in place. In fact, in many cases, we know they won't be in place. Most analysts and commentators and many business leaders are, you know, they're already saying with confidence that, you know, the future will not be the same. It's an opportunity to secure some of the gains and benefits maybe that, you know, have been on the fringes of business and organization implementation for many years, such as remote work and virtual work teams. You know, many organizations shied away from this, and now they have some experience of it. You know, they've also experienced risks to supply chains, labor flexibility, resource depletion, whether it's financial resource depletion or other resources. So we can say with a reasonable degree of confidence how the organization exists, what it does, and how it operates is going to be different for the next period, and likely to be a sustainable difference for the long term where benefits are realized. We are in a period of continuous volatility, uncertainty, and ambiguity. So we don't actually know just yet, you know, what is this new normal that everybody's talking about, or this new world, because there is still a degree of uncertainty as to how will this resolve itself as regards the health response, the vaccines, the medicines, and the need for more risk management action going forward. Our existing and legacy change management models, strong and all as they are, and they all have a value, they have been struggling for several decades now. We know that change failure rates tend to reside around the 70% plus mark. So the existing change management models to some degree will struggle with this period. And the next period requires change management that's agile in its own right, in the sense that it needs to be able to respond and adjust to situations as they emerge for each unique organization. So many organizations will look at this whole area of regenerating and rebuilding to find a new future and to secure their leadership position or achieve a leadership position. And using a normative development process and reference model will bring strength to that rebuilding and regeneration, making sure that nothing has been missed, that where shortcuts were taken, gaps are filled, and where new capabilities are required, they'll get focused on and developed, keeping everyone informed, right-sided and on board. So when we look at what's out there at the moment, there's a huge amount of advice and guidance. Every day I receive LinkedIn posts, emails from, you know, even the very big advisory firms. And when we look at the advice, an awful lot of it is very surface level. It's you know, it's giving you general guidance on what you need to do. Aim for speed over elegance, own the narrative. These are the type of statements we're seeing, and this is not helpful. It's a good reminder, but it doesn't help us to take specific action for our organizations. So I guess to some extent, hopefully what we're talking about today, and particularly when we hear, you know, the research that is behind it from Myles, you know, we're going to bring something that's a little bit stronger to organizations. Myles, I'm handing over to you now to talk a little bit about the crisis strategies. Unmute.
Okay, thanks, Declan. Right, so we've I have written a paper on this, and it will be for publication on our website shortly, and you will be given notification of where that is. So the 4 different strategies are continuance. So continuance is where the organization has not been locked down, is keeping on going as it was, kept open possibly as an essential service. But that brings risks. It's a time of change, that brings risks. The other alternative is where the organization is in lockdown. And this I describe as a period of systemic inertia or an individual comfort. Now, there are 2 possible outcomes here. You have a restart, you pick it up from where you left off. For instance, a lot of construction companies are halfway through contracts. Those contracts are there to be finished. It's a restart as they left off. Then the other alternative is a rebuild. Now this is the more problematic one. This is where you have a need to be responsive. Your customers are coming back. They're not all there on day one. You have to build relationships all throughout the system. And that is not something that is easily prepared for. And what we offer then is a model that acts as a reference for what you should be doing, what you should be paying attention to. Now, I start this off with the continuance because it's a very significant thing in the model itself, DSMT. This idea of we live in a natural world that is dynamic. You know, it is not stable. In the social end of things, it is increasingly more dynamic, and yet we find systems that cannot change. We find mindsets like linearity that cannot change. And I love this line from Yeats: "Hearts with one purpose alone through summer and winter seem enchanted to a stone to trouble the living stream." You know, the world is like the living stream, but people and systems with linear mindset, they get stuck like the stone. So there's a potential trap of linear reaction to continuance. Fierce important insight here is that linear mindset has no option but to seek continuance. Now this is seriously problematic for organizations. This is why there are up to 78% of organizations in a bureaucratic state rather than an agile state. It is because management has a tendency to be linear. So there are appeals that I have noticed recently being made to where you would expect a more integrative mindset in the higher levels of governance, And that is probably where focus needs to be made more in leveraging change. Now, of course, in the continuum situation, there is a real hidden risk. This is a disruptive period. This will be looked back on like a war where new technologies, new approaches, new philosophies emerged. And anyone that's caught in this continuum has a serious risk of missing these. So you have to keep the levels of our model taken over. And in particular, we have to do this environmental scanning. We need organizations that are working away, as I say, dirt up to their elbows, getting involved in the work. They have to make sure the organization is taking cognizance of everything that's going on in the environment. Okay, Declan, next one. That's our invention. The social platform is also critically important. We'll see a bit of this in the model as I explained it in detail. But if people are taking health risks for the organization, we need to implement recognition we need to implement recognition of people as a social platform for any development. But in particular, if they are taking risks for the organization, they need this kind of recognition, and it should be monitoring, obviously, of course, as well. But peer support monitoring in stressful situations, if leadership support is dissipated, that means that people are encouraged to look after themselves. If the leader is too remote, as in the new remote situation, or too busy in the change situation, there needs to be structures put in place where people can support each other.
Thanks, Myles. I think you'll come back to restart and regeneration as strategies because they're core to what we're talking about today. But I'm just going to briefly discuss the high-level model that is designed to simplify the situation and have a framework for addressing change in this type of context. So we talked about the core process that most organizations should be considering. We have the rescue phase, and for many organizations, they're going into a phase now of stabilization. They're re-getting back to work, and they're going to have to start looking at the reshaping of their organization and their business before they press the button to try and rescale. And, it's about managing the future, it's analyzing the data, as Myles said, scanning, planning, and execution. But, what are the things you need to focus on? And we identified through our research that, there are 5 areas that are important. We need to focus on building agility in any new strategy, plan, or change to the organization, because the future is uncertain. And if you lack agility, then you will lack responsiveness to deal with the changes that happen. Not just the changes as a result of a regulatory or a government body, but changes perhaps in the supply chain, new entrants coming into the market. Technology is another key, and technology has been significant even in the rescue phase. As we see more and more businesses going online, we see a greater use of remote and home working and virtual teams. So every organization is going to have to look at building their capability for this new digital world. The market is so what's happening in your market, on both sides of the equation, on the supply and the demand side, and financial. We've got to align any organization's ambitions with the available financial resources. And we know that financial markets and governments are taking steps to provide financial relief to organizations. And many organizations have, depleted their passing power financially. And ultimately, the whole thing needs to be framed in, what's our advantage? How are we going to compete when we come back out of this scenario as we rebuild or we reshape or re-engineer our organization? And then managing this reconfiguration excuse me, it's all about the, you know, the means will be around the new world of work. We have work at an individual level, you know, and the key constructs that make work effective and efficient: work identity, work feedback, work significance, and then the work of teams. And we know from our research that, you know, when we look at building team effectiveness, when we move people to remote working, we change the dynamics of teams, we create new teams. And there are three key dynamics that influence this. There is, how effective is the organization in enabling these change and improvements and new teams? There's the team process itself, and then there is the individual working within the teams. And the organization maturity index is our body of knowledge and maturity framework that is based on dynamic systems maturity theory, which Myles is going to talk about shortly, for looking at what are those key capabilities the organization requires and at what maturity levels. And what are, setting our ambition as to, you know, what are the outcomes we want to achieve, and understanding the target maturity levels we need to achieve will be essential component of the analysis and the planning stage. And finally, we have the team maturity index, which is looking at how are these new teams performing? What capabilities have they got? What do we need to do to make sure the execution can happen successfully? So now I'm going to hand back to Myles to talk about the theory and the development process.
Okay, I want to note a wonderful question from Dana about would the process not be linear, too linear itself? That's an excellent observation. In selling the thing, we hope that people with a linear mindset will see something that is step oriented, that there is a definite move from step 1, 2, 3 through to 7. But what the process is doing is building dynamism. So that's important to understand. This is so you're moving from gathering people together, as I'll show, and building dynamism. But also we're providing a menu from which people can pull and grab their elements, but they know where they are within the system. That's not given by other advice. Okay, so it's just, look, this is a scientific means for understanding and improving human systems, such as organizations. This is applicable to psychology, organizations, and macroeconomic. Now, it is peer-reviewed publication for both its psychology and organizational science. There's a thesis half reviewed for the macro and is not fully yet reviewed. So, okay, so the science comes from all over these because there is bias in each of these. Psychology bias to the bottom end of the model, organizations to the top. And it was necessary to do this to make sense of it all. Yes, Dan, I would advise reading the paper because it is quite broad and it pulls in far more than we can squash into a presentation. So the normative development process to build agility. This is the key how it works. You diagnose where the organization is at. That's its maturity level. And in a previous paper that I referenced in the other paper, you know, we redefine culture. This is quite powerful stuff. We can actually redefine and operationalize culture in terms of maturity level. But above all, we provide traction. That is, you diagnose the level, you aim your intervention at that level. That gives you traction. That's always missing. They're always overstepping the capacity of an organization for change. Also, the normative phases give sustainability. Again, it's this step-by-step process, and that's missing in other approaches. So there are things that the model brings to view that have not been seen before, habituation and inversion. So I'm going to show you some of these in a moment. Excuse me. So here are our 7 levels. Our crash level, as we call it, it starts off, so this is our developmental process. Excuse me now a moment while I make adjustments. I can see all of this. So our first our first phase, if you like, in the developmental process is this regenerative disruption. We motivate a critical network for change. A critical network is a collection of people who are representative, ideally, of different stakeholders that have credibility to both engage in planning and champion the change. So you have to create this disorienting dilemma. You get no change without this disorienting dilemma. Now, it can be the diagnostic itself. You can take this diagnostic and find your organization is really at this critical level where it might have thought it was at advantage level. This is a big problem out there. Like I said, we reference research that shows 78% of organizations are at the that operational level and below. That means they're either bureaucratic, caught in a niche, and so on. They don't have capacity for change. So our disconnect then is we have to draw a line in the sand. We have to get this network to make this decisive disconnect from the organization as it was. We are no longer that person, is the equivalent in psychology. In organizations, it's the same thing. We have to turn our back on whatever the problems are with any of the capabilities that we're measuring. Our incubation is facilitating this critical network to plan the development. And this has to be done in a kind of, we're not involved in the to and fro. We have this space, whether it be virtual or otherwise, we are together in this and we're going to champion what comes out. And in particular, the leader who has been involved in this must take accountability. Now, other kinds of singularity across the different capabilities, because capabilities are running from finance to to interpersonal, to technology. We need to create some wins across capabilities as singularities that we can point to strength in plans, for example. But the critical divergence then would be to delegate, if this was a behavioral change, to delegate the championing, the walk as you talk kind of thing, to your critical network. They're going to go back to their roles and do this. Other than that, diversification then can be through opportunism. This has to be a dynamic stage. And of course, if you don't get out of this within a set period of time, you habituate here and it's a bit chaotic. The next level is called comfort level. It's about the socio-emotive level of organization. So we onboard the people. So this is done through workshops and stuff like that, communications. And a lot of change initiatives do not get beyond this other than training. And this is very sad, but it's a repetitive theme. They just communicate and train, and that's it. But this process begins with your critical network that's going to fan out and drive the system, and it goes all the way up to the leadership levels. But managing the socio-emotive issues, the stabilization is more the social issues. So this is about the social platform I mentioned. And of course, taking stock of the opportunities that might be arising across capabilities. Destabilization, then challenge the people when they're on board socially, when they have their social supports, challenge them, resource the opportunities then that come from the critical divergence stage. Use pilots. This is another destabilization effect. Our economy, for example, on support is in stabilization, but it needs to be destabilized. It's an unstable equilibrium effect that needs to be brought, and that needs pilots. Now, a lot of countries are not doing piloting. They're not picking regions that have better figures than others. A lot of countries are just doing blanket destabilization, and the risk is that you degrade into the chaos level, which is that critical level. The operational learning is your training and development. So you have everyone on board socially and emotionally. The champions are walking the talk. Your next step is the training to develop your strategic competence. The next level then, because the people are trained, is to establish a process procedure to take your capability as far as desired. So this will be your contracts, your process, your procedure, your SAP, all of that kind of stuff. The next level is your dynamic learning, really. This is energy stuff. Below, we have an internal fitness for activity. Now we're bringing our change into the marketplace, bringing it into the customer. This has to be done with energy. We benchmark our performance. Customer must define what we're doing here. Dynamic learning means that everyone in the organization, every single person, is engaging with the customers in the marketplace and feeding back into their role and their team and their processes of what they are learning. This is a critically important thing. And then we bring a system around this. We make a system of it, and in particular, we make sure it's a boundaryless system, and it can accommodate complex structures like matrix structures and so on. Now, if you have a dynamic system, it is a psychological certainty that you will get innovation. If you have your energized organization, they are empowered at that level 5, emergence will ensure that you do get self-expression unless it's stopped. This is a psychological certainty. Dynamic systems produce innovation. Now, you have to get this at a singular level, at self-expression, at each individual. Only then can you look for self-organized teams. And the problem is that you get change management that tries and puts in self-organized teams in one go. Task forces, enterprises, etc. These are what you can achieve if you have built up your layers. And our next webinar is actually called Regenerative Ecosystem, and we go into great detail how this is achieved. But these are the levels of leadership. Win-win leadership positioning. We have our organizational advantage. We're positioned now in the marketplace. We are in a position of power, strength, I should say, to negotiate. Now, we also have to provide a leadership style that is more coaching than mentoring, of course. We don't want clones. We want people to be themselves as energized. And your regenerative leadership. Organizations at this level, they are fit for M&As. 50% of M&As fail because they're not operating from these really integrative levels of functioning. Okay. Look, there's just a brief glimpse of, the reviewers use this term unprecedented scientific depth. This is the psychology that's behind it. You can look back at this. This will be posted online. You can look back at this to your heart's content. But you can see the depth that's involved. These phases are not simply about organizations. They're about human systems, and they apply equally to individuals. As you can see on the second column it even organizes how personality disorders are organized around the schemas identified in the model. This is how it incorporates and correlates to change management models that are out there. And look, they're all 5 easy step models that are out there. They're pandering to short memory capacity. They're not pandering. They're not attending to the reality of the systems involved. You can see the gaps. These are serious omissions which our model takes on board. Now, this is what the model looks like in its entirety. This is the higher level graphic. We see our levels on the left from crash to leadership. They're user-friendly names, but we've seen the depth behind them. You see there also disintegrative and integrative, the red and the blue. And here's the critical thing. If you're measured in the level 3, 2, 1 and half level 4, you have no traction for change whatsoever. Any introduction of change is going to leave the organization worse off than it was. You can see the dynamics, as we call them, forces of construct capabilities, starting with physical resources, going through work, emotion. See the one in the yellow is goals, and that is how it looks in its capabilities. What are measured behind each of these is 5 different construct capabilities. This is where this is. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I was going to use something that is not politically correct, so we leave it at that. This is the work face of the model. This is, when it gets down to the constructs. Okay. So it's a critically important thing to be able to say this is a scientific scale, this is normative, this is how organizations should be, this is what is proven in the thesis that are due for publication. We're establishing norms for organizations that we can measure against. In the process, as you can see here, if you're measured in the red level, you have to descend to the very bottom and begin at the bottom up. You have to develop your traction. This is producing your sustainable developmental process. And without it, you're only, well, you're blowing in the wind, as the man says. Okay, it can be applied to systems and subsystems and so on. All right, Declan, that's fine. So this is a brief look at the building blocks, the capabilities as they are itemized for each dynamic. You can go through them for yourselves, but there are measures and diagnostic capability on the website for each of these levels. You can take a quick shot at simply one diagnostic of the organization. It can take you 2 minutes. Then you can take one at the next level, which is across the dynamics. This is a kind of a triage approach, and then you can take the deeper one for your organization development program. So here we have research that we're piling in together into our model that shows exactly what's happening out in the world. And the research is referenced in the paper. 51% are trapped in startup. I've kind of mentioned this already. These are the very lower levels. There's a loss of 500% and more. So why would organizations be here? They're here because of this linear mindset. Bureaucratic is our average across the market. Again, we're stuck in this linear mindset. Only 22% achieve agility, and yet there is an average of 300% premium. And believe me, when you get to leadership levels, that is far greater, as everyone can anticipate. So this is what's happening out there. It's a colossal indictment of the practices that have proved a failure in a pre-COVID world. They're not fit for purpose in a VUCA that has been given a tremendous boost by the COVID crisis. Quick look at the responsive rebuild. Then we translate what we've gone through before into our situation now. Okay, we've got to keep our critical network buzzing to produce new ideas for the new normal. This is your environmental scanning has to feed in. People must be actively involved in the workplace. They must be putting through new ideas, creating this disruption within the organization. Disconnect for the new world is going to be far more dynamic. So we've got to get rid of our sense of control, as you can see with remote working even. Facilitate planning for different scenarios, opportunities, and the above process. This is what incubation is about. We're going to take the organization through these phases. So we have to plan for this. We have to understand it and plan for it. And again, this is a grab and pull menu. This is not to be done in actual linear sequence, but at least it gives an organization an idea of what's missing and what needs to be replaced at a later time and where they're affecting the system. So the trusted leader, and this is where trust is really necessary. The leader has to make it personal for all. They have to get down among the troops. They have to do the Henry V. They have to get down there and talk to individuals. You are Scandinavian Airlines, all that kind of personal messaging stuff. So delegate then our sourcing opportunistic alternatives across all capabilities, including the supply chain. Okay, this is, everything has to be up for grabs. Everything has to be up for change. Everything has to be optimized. Everything has to be brought into a system. The problem is that the system is too stretched. Stabilization, this is our social platform and recognition of life events. This is an interesting dynamic in organizations that are found to have quite significant effects. Even if the organization is not really being that commercially successful, keep people tied together, keep that social dynamic going. A recognition of life events. There are platforms out there that you can post births and other kind of things like that. Prepare for fears. We have to deal with fears. If you're bringing people back in, they have to be assuaged of their fears. Then you challenge your people. It is only when you have the emotional and the social in place, then you can challenge people and resource your opportunities and so on. Now, learning and development has to come now in the process. You have to train your people for the new normal. The new normal is more autonomy. The new normal is built on trust. These are things that are not easily learned. Trust, for example, has to be learned through experiential learning. You have to feel the difference that it makes and how easy it is to lose trust. That's the critical thing. How easy it is to give signals that undermine trust. That is only learned experientially, not from a book, not from an online program. Recalibrate bureaucracy for the new agility. Well, that's kind of obvious. Devise new contracts, processes, everything has to be made more dynamic. This is our competitive level. This is the dynamic learning. This is vicious. I put in the word vicious environmental scanning. You have to be ahead of everybody else. You have to be ahead of everyone else in your intelligence, in your sector, to be ahead of the game as it is now. And that is with all kinds of contexts. The guys frontlining, your shop floor, whatever it is, you need to have a system without barriers, without boundaries, where information travels quickly from the outside world. Self-empowerment, leave timelines. Now we're in a new world of people working remotely. They have to be given, and it is a proven thing, they have to be given a sense of control over organizing their time. A lot of people have different time availability and slots of times during the day if they're working from home, especially if they have children and all of that kind of stuff. We have to facilitate self-expression. Self-organized teams and collaboration and task forces, etc., as open innovation system. We'll go into this in more detail in our next webinar. But recalibrate the win-win positions. You've got to recalibrate nearly everything in our new world. But above all, you have to keep embodying this authentic leadership style. Now, again, what is authentic leadership? You read it out there. It looks like everything we'd like, but really the model shows that an authentic leader is someone who has gone through all of these phases, that has done the turnaround, that has done the planning, that has done the taking accountability, that has done the chaos. All of these levels. That is what authentic leadership is redefined as. So, team rebuilding. Declan, is that you?
That's me. I'm just going to start that now. So basically, you know, the key building block of applying and executing your post-lockdown strategy is the team and the new teams that have formed. So we need to take a look at, you know, how are they working? What support are we giving them? And as this example of Capgemini committing to a very high percentage of the workforce moving to remote working, and already we know Twitter has said anyone who wants to work from home can work from home. So, you know, there is a new demands on them for autonomy, agility, and new demands on the leadership to create this coaching style, to build the teams and to allow them to develop through their forming, their storming, their norming, and their performing phases. And they cannot succeed unless they address the three key dynamics, and they reside at the three higher levels. So we have to build our teams to those levels. And the Team Maturity Index provides a process for organizations to build the teams to these levels. And when we look at the Team Maturity Index, we can see we have the three core dynamics and the various constructs, which are the building blocks that we can measure, identify existing capability, set the appropriate targets, and receive the guidance and development actions from the body of knowledge for the Team Maturity Index, which is underpinned by the theory and the model that Myles has outlined, Dynamic Systems Maturity Theory. We can contrast the Team Maturity Index. This is something that you can look at your leisure, but again, you can see there is a right over on the right-hand side, you can see that the team member behavior, you know, can be defined and assessed and understood, and then action-oriented at those levels that reflect building the team member and the team's capabilities up towards the leadership levels. We've captured in this diagram some of the core theories that we're all familiar with. You know, we have Tuckman's forming, norming, storming, and performing, which is a basic process that all teams go through, and the speed they go through it and their effectiveness is determined by how well they focus on the task, the procedure of the team, and the relationships. And as the team matures in its effectiveness, we can see more and more it's focused on its task and its output. And where the team maturity index supports this is identifying where they are and helping them build, identify what they need to do to prepare, what they need to do to improve, and what do they need to do to optimize their performance as they help in the restarting or the rebuilding of the organization and its business. So just a quick recap of the structure. We have the dynamics, which are the forces that influence the performance of the organization. We have the constructs at the lower level, which are the detailed building blocks. We have a 7-level maturity scale, which is underpinned by the 15 levels of dynamic systems maturity theory. And then we have the ability to configure assessments at different levels and with the different components, whether they're dynamics or they're constructs, for the specific context of each organization. And likewise for the team, it's a consistent structure and architecture and model for the team maturity index. Myles, do you want to talk about the next unmute?
Okay, the next webinar is entitled The Ultimate in Open Innovation. This is what organizations are supposed to be, but our model takes the open innovation system a step further to this regenerative ecosystem. I've just referenced it it's at the highest level of our model, and we have a case study which we can refer to as well. Okay.
Okay, I think we're nearing the end of the session now. Is if there's any additional questions, we took a few questions during the session. If there's any additional questions. Seems we don't have any, so we hope you got some value from this, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.